Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about some special techniques of how to work with heavier fabric. And, there's such a wide variety of people that join us on these Facebook Lives. Some may be beginner sewers, some may have a lot of experience, but I think there's going to be a few techniques that you'll probably enjoy today, one way or another. So, when we think of heavier fabrics, we think of working with denims. And certainly I do a lot of working with denims. And there's so many different weights of denims. We have some great stitches for it. And we also have the sewing advisor that we can set our machine for the best stitch and the best tension and press foot pressure and all of that. But, like whether you're making something like here's just a simple recycled bag that I made using some pairs of jeans that I didn't fit into anymore. There's always going to be places that are heavy, like sewing this pocket on. Not only do you have the multiple layers, but you have to worry about sewing around the grommets. And those kinds of things might mean just a switch of a foot from using your regular foot to maybe using the zipper foot so you can get really close to the fabric without endangering the needle by hitting the grommet. So whether you're doing things like that. Now, I love to embroider my jeans. Here's a pair of jeans that I embroidered. And so I had to take the seams apart. Let me see if I can put them up here like this. And I took the seams apart in the center, put them all back together. You really can't tell that anything was done to them when you're finished. And that's because I will always recreate what I'm doing. In this case, the top stitching was done in a similar color as the pants. But if my top stitching was using a orange color, a yellow color, I would mimic that look so people couldn't see what was being done. Now, the other type of heavier fabric that we can talk about are working with things like leather. Now, I have quite a few different kinds of faux leather and also real leather. This is a piece that I haven't done anything yet with it, and it has got some depth to it. It's pretty heavy, although you can see there's a little bit of stretch to it. This orange one is actually quite a heavy piece of leather, and that's what I used to make this leather purse. Now, when I did this was done, I did start in embroidery, but if you don't have an embroidery machine, then you certainly can use your sewing machine and come up with some maybe traditional appliques that you would add on top of it. But in this case, I used the cutwork needles, and the cutwork needles did an amazing job, even with this very heavy leather, of cutting away the leather. And so I was pretty impressed by that. And I thought I might have to do it twice, but I didn't. So that was kind of pretty cool. But I'll open this up and just kind of give you a little bit of a close-up. And really, this really did do a very nice job stitching. Even on the sides, I stitched it there. And I came down and I kind of stitched a seam on the bottom, even though there wasn't one. And this was probably about the heaviest thing that I've ever done with actual fabric and stitching. So we're going to talk about needles, because a lot of times when you think of sewing with different leathers and vinyls, that you might use a leather needle when you're embroidering that or stitching it. And I don't do that. I always try to work with the least invasive needle as possible. So when I was embroidering with a 9014 embroidery needle. And you all know that the needles are color coded, right? On the end of them, you will see an Inspire 90 embroidery needle will have a red color on that. A denim needle is going to have a blue. Every needle type, like a stretch needle, will have a different color on it. It's gotten really easy to figure out what type of needle it is. So I can always remind myself what the needle I have in my machine is. So the reason I don't use a leather needle when I'm embroidering is there is like almost a spear type of thing on the leather needle where it kind of is meant to cut through the leather to make it easier to sew. But our machines are so fabulous that I've never really found it necessary to go that far. So if you're sewing with denim or you're sewing regular, different fabrics, a denim needle is a really nice choice because it's got a nice sharp tip, just like an embroidery needle has a nice sharp tip. And when you're sewing on denim, you're going to get a much straighter stitch when you're working with a denim needle. So we're going to go over to the machine and I'm going to start sewing in a few minutes. But I just wanted to kind of give you a couple of examples of some of the things that I've done. And then we'll talk about the techniques when we go to the machine. Now, I started playing with marine vinyl and faux vinyl. Many of you have done this project. It is posted on the Husqvarna Viking page. And for those of you who do have an embroidery machine, this would be something you could do if you had a ruby or a diamond. And then I also did post one on the larger size for those of you that have the Epic 10-inch wide hoop, so that you can make the bigger one. But they'll put a link on there for this project so that you can, if you're interested, you can download the design, because it's a free design that I put there for you. So it is on the Husqvarna Viking page, and you can find it anytime you want to. But this was kind of the stuff I started working with. Marine vinyl is the kind of vinyl that you use when you're covering boat seats. I have a pontoon boat right now, and I'm hoping it's going to be a while before I have to recover the seats, but it's nice to know my machine can handle it. And this stuff actually sews like butter. A regular needle will just pierce it and not have any problems. So I really didn't have to do anything. And when I was embroidering it, I actually used an 75 11 embroidery needle with it, because I didn't want to have too big of a hole in the vinyl. So that's a consideration. I know many of you feel like, okay, this is a heavier fabric, I need to use a thicker needle, but do you really want to have a larger hole in the vinyl or the leather? And that sometimes, to me, doesn't give you as nice a look. So in this case, with the marine vinyl, that 7511 needle did a great job, and I didn't have any problems with it at all. So if you're looking for a project working with either faux leathers or marine vinyls and that kind of material, give that project a try, because it's a lot of fun. Now, as I'm going to go on here, I'm going to show you a couple of other projects. Now, we don't usually think of velvet as being a heavier project. This was a little bag that I made, and the inside of it, I used inner form. So there are multiple layers. There's a velvet, there's a lining, a satin lining in here. And then I have zippers in here and all different kinds of things in here. But I put an inner form in here, which is a very heavy, stiff. You can see this. We sell it by the bag. It's called INR form, IN-R form. And it gives a lot of shape to your projects. But because it's giving you shape, it also gives you a lot of bulk. And so you don't need a special needle to use with it, but you may need to make a couple of adjustments, because your foot, when you're sewing, is kind of floating up high. And when you set your machine, you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to start sewing, and it may just be perfect, but there's also a possibility you may get skip stitches. And that's because the inner form is so thick that the foot is sitting up higher, and what you might need to do is increase the press-to-foot pressure so it compacts it down a little bit if that's happening. Another reason that you would change your needle would be skip stitches. And 99% of the time, when you are seeing a skip stitches, it's needle related. So if you change the needle, everything's taken care of and it's all fixed. Now, there is a question about, do you need to slow the speed down when you're working with marine vinyl? I do not slow the speed down working with marine vinyl. If you're more comfortable doing it, you certainly can, but I always try to run it at top speed and see what it looks like. And if I've got an issue, I can address it, but I've never had any problem. And I do a lot of embroidery on marine vinyl. What I will do is sometimes, even with leathers, if I'm, and Meredith, you might want to add this in there. If I'm doing embroidery on leather, and I find like this one here had a bit of stretch to it, this way here, then I will always use the Inspira Fashion Fuse stabilizer on the back. And then I'll just put a tear away into the hoop, or even a wash away if I want it to wash away. But I want something to stop that stretch as the leather is being embroidered, and the faux leather, it would be the same type of thing. So if you don't have that in your arsenal, the Fashion Fuse is really perfect for embroidering with leather and vinyl, faux leather, the marine vinyl, and I even like it on the silk dupioni. It's really a beautiful, soft stabilizer on the back of it. So this was a bag that I made. It's not a pattern we sell, so don't ask. It's called Rhapsody. What I loved about it is it's got all of these zipper pockets inside here, and it also has the inner form as this outside kind of to give it bulk and to give it shape. The only thing I have left to it is to put on the straps. But what's important about this is the way that the zippers, these little pockets, get attached is after you're finished doing the zippers, and I have one here that's pinned. Let me see if I can show you this one here. This little gusset's made, and then you bring this up and you pinch the pocket in here together like this, and then you've got to sew. And this is the kind of stuff that gets people into a lot of trouble. So I'm going to show you a really simple, easy technique that makes it a lot easier to do it. Now you would say, well, how much bulk could really be in here? Well, there is batting, there is 2 layers of fabric, there's a zipper, and each pocket has got 2 sides to it, and then there's batting or a facing in there. So I think I counted that there was actually 9 layers of fabric in there. And it isn't so much that it's hard to do, it's just you have a very bulky tip, and then it goes down to a more reasonable level. Now, I have sewn, all of our machines have different piercing power, right? So if you have an opal or a ruby or a diamond, that piercing power is around 80, and that usually works just fine for most things that you might want to do. If you're lucky enough to have one of the epics, the 95Q, that piercing power is significantly more. So this was a fabric sandwich I did. This is 30 layers of fabric, and I just did it as a test to kind of see. I wouldn't get this many layers of fabric with my opal or my ruby, but with the epics, you really do have that expectation that you can sew a lot of heavier things. So many of you have a couple of different machines. If you're going to work on your heavier fabric like that, I would always choose to use my epic, because I know that that has that the piercing power on that is 90% more than the opals and the rubies and the diamonds. So somebody asked a question about stabilizer and needle for ultra suede. The ultra suede is actually beautiful to stitch with, and I would still, if I was embroidering on that, put the fashion fuse on the back of it, and I would have used an embroidery needle. Now, again, general consensus is you use the bigger the fabric, the thicker the fabric, then you're going to use a bigger needle with that. I think that's fine if you're just learning to start out like that. But the more you start to embroider and the more you start to sew, you're going to realize that maybe you don't want to see that needle marks going through here. And I personally, and this is my own personal preference, I usually will go to the smallest needle I can get away with, because if I have an 80-12 needle that I can know is going to do a beautiful job sewing and a beautiful job embroidering, and it's going to leave a smaller hole in my leather, well, that's what I'm going to choose to do. But I also am quite aware that that needle will wear down faster, and I'm not going to need to replace it more often. And that's really the choice you're making, right? 90-14 needle is a much thicker needle, and it's going to last you longer. And if you go to a 116 needle, that's going to last even longer. Do you like the look of it? Is that really making you happy? So whenever I'm working, even on a quilt, I will usually use an 80-12 needle, because when I hold that quilt up, I don't want to see the bigger needle going through that and seeing daylight on the other side. I personally prefer a smaller needle. Now, if you don't like changing your needle often, that's going to get you into trouble, because a size 80 needle, it'll bend more often, and it will get duller quicker. So that's always your thing. What I think everybody should have in their collection, and if you don't have it, this is a good time to go and do it, is you need to have a good collection of needles. You need a denim needle for when you're working with fibers that are very, very thick, like the denim. The reason that this is so important is because every fiber is so thick. Each little thing, and this particular one's not even a thick piece of denim, but the fibers are so thick that a denim needle's got a really nice sharp point, and it will pierce the fiber wherever it is, and you're going to get a much straighter stitch if you're using a denim needle when you're sewing on any kind of denim or any canvas. Anything that's got a lot of very thick fibers, always use a denim needle. Now, there was a question about the Topaz 50. The piercing power is 80, and the Sapphire 85Q, the Sapphire 85, I believe that's 94. It's somewhere between 90 and 94. So it is more than the opals, and that's a nice choice. The Ruby 90 is also up at 150. So that's another one that you know you're going to have that extra piercing power if that's important to you. If you're going to be making a lot of bags and working with a lot of heavy things like canvas and leather and vinyl, that's always a consideration, right? But you're going to see, I'm going to go over to the opal, and you're going to see it's going to do a great job. And we're going to show you some of the techniques that are on there. But first, we're going to just show you a couple of other things. Now, this was my last Facebook Live. I was working on this belt. Well, I finally made the belt. This has got a faux leather in it with a layer of seam, and then I put the faux leather on the back, and I finished off the edge going around. It was a satin stitch, and I, believe it or not, I accidentally cut too close to the satin stitch that was existing. I was not going to do that, but I sliced it in a little bit, so then I had to cut it even and go over it with my sewing machine. And I love our satin stitch. Husqvarna Viking's got the nicest satin stitch out there. It's just so rich looking and so beautiful. The SE is at an 80 also. The piercing power. Yeah, like 80, 90% of our machines have a piercing power of around 80, which is pretty traditional for the sewing market. And when we came out with a line of Epics, we really made a point of making sure that we were going to get a lot more piercing power for those people who really want it. It's like an industrial strength piercing power. I mean, it really is incredible when you think about being able to do 30 layers of fabric. And there's not one skip stitch there. I don't know if you can see both. I did not put a special needle in. And I think I had embroidery thread in the top and bobbin thread in the bottom. And I did the reinforced stitch, and I did the straight stitch, and it really was pretty magnificent. So here's another project. This is a project that Nancy Bronstein made, and it was embroidered with the marine vinyl, and then we use cork on the outside edge. I guess I can put it right side up. But again, when you're looking at this, all you're seeing is the stitching. You're not seeing the hole where the needle goes through the vinyl, and that's kind of a good thing to think about as you're doing it. I also do a lot of these bracelets working with decorative stitches, and then this is kind of treated the same way as I did the belt, and a watch strap where I just, add a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I work a lot with either real leather or marine vinyls, anything that gives me that really elegant look to something. Now, somebody asked a question about what stitch length would you do with that many layers? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go over and look at the opal and talk about how you make a decision about what fabric selection you're going to make and what changes. So we're going to do that. But I got one more thing to show you, because when we go over there, we're going to start sewing and I won't come back. So these things have gotten really, really popular. I don't know if you saw, here's a little rope bowl that I made. And this is one that I used a plain color cord. And this is just like the cotton cord that you use for, when you're hanging your laundry. It's a laundry rope. And there's a lot of different kinds you can get, a lot of different sizes and colors. There's a 7/3, 30 seconds, and then there's a 1/4 of an inch. And I like the 1/4 of an inch one. This one here is a 1/4 of an inch, but there is also 1/2 inch and wider ones too. But this is getting really popular. And if you probably have seen some of these online, I had so much fun with this because it was, this was the second one I did. And after I was done, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I decided to paint it. You can use RIT dyes. You can use all kinds of different paints that are fabric paints. And then I added a little butterfly over here. I'm not sure if he's staying or not. So I put him on here as a little bit of an experiment. And they're so easy to do. Now I've done this one here I did on the opal, And if you wanted to add an embroidery to it, you would start with the bottom. You could embroider on a separate piece of fabric and then applique that to the center. In this case, I put some of that glitter flex on the back of it, and I appliqued the two of them at the same time. And this one here, I just trimmed very close afterwards when I was done. But you can get some really beautiful embroidery designs that you put on the bottom. And then as you're going and you keep building, when you're ready to go up and to get the sides like this, then you're just tipping the bowl up. And I'll show you what that's done. I'm going to show you this one on the opal. So I'm going to put that one over there. Here's another little one. I found some colored rope. This is a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch, but I think this is kind of fun. And all I did was every once in a while, I just took some fabric that was cut on the bias and then did a couple of rows on it. I'm not sure what this is going to be, but once you start using your imagination, if I was to keep going up, this could easily be a purse that would come up much higher. I could put straps on it. And the last one that I have here, this one, this was my first one I made, and I was pretty pleased with this. I have used cork and did a little embroidery with my initial on it. And then that was the last thing that went on. And I started, you can see it in the center here. I went around and around and then came back up. And then here for the handles, all I did was I just didn't stitch that area. And then I came back and started stitching to go around again. I don't have a pattern for this, but in at some point in the next little while, I'll put up a project so you have it. But I really recommend, if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, there's some great Facebook groups that are into these rope bowls and rope projects, and a lot of YouTube videos on there too. So don't wait for me. Go and get started, because there are some really great places where you can get a lot of information on how to do this kind of stuff. Now, again, the question was what size with the cork. I am not, if you ask me this question and you ask 10 other people, you might get different questions. I always go with the smallest needle that I know is going to last. So in the cork with this, I know I had an 80 needle in there. I had an embroidery needle. And it did a fine job, right? Now, if it wasn't doing a fine job, I would put a heavier needle in there. So somebody's asking a question. I'm contemplating making a denim crazy quilt flip and sew technique. Would those seams be too thick for embroidery? Absolutely, those seams would not be too thick for embroidery and embellishment. I actually have something like that around. I didn't think about bringing it out. The Topaz 50 and the Epic 2 are the machines she has. I would definitely be doing your embellishing with the Epic 2. That would make a huge difference. And when you're using a denim needle for that project, I would use a 14, because you're going to be piecing it together. You're going to be sewing fast, and you're not worried about the size of the hole of the needle piercing it. You're just sewing it together. So in that case, I would use a heavier denim needle when I'm piecing something together. And that's kind of the way that you think it through, right? Everybody, when you start a project, should be thinking, okay, what am I doing? I do a little test. You'll actually see some of mine here. All right. I just tested it with the needle that I had in there, and I tried a few different things to see whether I liked the stitch quality, whether it was as straight as I wanted it to be. And then once I've done a test like that, then I make a decision. So I never just like randomly, well, I can't honestly say that. Sometimes I just have a universal needle in and I'll try it and see. And if it looks good, then I go with it. But if I'm not happy, I'm going to change it. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to say, okay, I know I'm going to get a much straighter look, a much straighter stitch with a denim needle. So I'm going to put a denim needle in. So somebody asked, did I spray paint the bowl or is it fabric wrapped? I'm not sure which one you're talking about. This one here, I had fabric paint and I added water to it and I just brushed it on. So the bottom I added green just because I want it to be different. And I just brushed it on just like I was painting a window or something, or a wall. And then as I came up, I got bored. So I thought, well, I'm going to change the color. And then I just kind of played with it like that. But there is a lot of different things you can do. So many great products on the market right now. This one I used a dye, and I used the Prochem dyes with this one because I had them. And I immersed it in, and I put the bottom in first, and then I immersed it farther in. So the top is a little bit lighter. And it was actually much, much brighter, but I decided to spray it with a product that would make it waterproof. And it actually changed the color a little bit. It got a little duller looking. So I might do the same thing, but I would use a different product next time. But we're not going to spend too much time on this because I know that there's a lot of questions out there about other things. So, but I wanted to just show you, like, who would think that you could sew stuff like this with your machine, right? And this easily, all of this can be done with your Opal. If you have an SE, if Topaz 50, any of the machines that we have and we're selling, I know people that are doing these type of bowls with the Emerald 118. So it's not hard to do, but there's just little techniques that make all the difference once you start sewing. So I'm going to I'll show you my last one because I don't think I've shown you this one yet. So this is one, I actually really like this one. It was, this is not wrapped with fabric. What I did was, this is the leftover green cord from the one that I dyed. And then I got this web mesh because I have all these colors of web mesh that I use. I actually make jewelry with it and wrap a thinner cord to use this as a cord for making jewelry. But the way that the web mesh works is it just slides on like this. All right. And then when you're ready to start stitching it, it will stretch out to whatever size cord you have in there. And then you use your zigzag to do it, and it works pretty well. So that kind of gave a completely different look to the bowl, a little bit elegant. I think it was really nice. And this was the second bowl I made. So I've been really inspired by a lot of people I see on the different Facebook groups that do the rope bowls. And I know there's people on this call that have a lot more experience making these rope bowls and coasters. Think about how beautiful it could make as a placemat, right? Because it's so easy. The difference between making a circle and making it the base of it a circle and then coming up the sides, or making it an oval, is very, very easy. When you start, if you're doing a circle, you just keep going around in circles. And when you're doing the, let me see, like this one here, I started just going around in circles. Whereas the oval that I did here, I started with 2 long pieces. And so there were 2 long pieces that came down, and then I just kept going around that piece like that until it made a bigger oval. Those would make gorgeous placemats and a lot of opportunity to add embroidery to those. So for those of you that have it, that's something to think about, keeping that in mind. So I didn't pull over my name necklace. Next time I'll think about pulling over the jewelry that I made. I made a necklace using a thinner cord with this, and then I put beads on it, and it was really a fun project. So I hope I'm inspiring you to try a few new things. And as usual, I want you to go to bed dreaming tonight about all the things you want to try tomorrow. So I hope that that's the way it works out. All right, so we're going to go over to the machine. I'm going to flip over to the Opal. We're going to start with the Opal, and I'll put a few of these things down. And then we're going to talk about setting your machine, what you're looking for, and a couple of important things that you might not think about when you're working with heavier fabrics and fibers. Let me see. Is this the right one? No, that's not. There it is. That's the one we're going to go to. All right. Now, the screen you're looking at is the screen for the Opal 690Q. It would be very similar for the Sapphire 930, the Topazes. They all have a very similar screen. The first thing you're going to notice up top is that you have the fabric selection. Now, on a woven medium fabric, your stitch length is at 2.5. The needle position is in the center. And then it's telling you to use the A foot, or suggesting. It's suggesting an 80 needle, and then there's your fabric that you have selected. Now, if I go change from a woven medium to a woven heavy, which is what I want to do, I've selected woven heavy. Now I'm going to go back. My stitch length is now at 3.0. So I always watch. This is how I learned so much about sewing. I'm just self-trained. This is not something where I've gone to school. I'm self-trained. I honestly believe everything I ever learned about sewing, I learned from watching what is happening with that sewing advisor. So by going to a heavier fabric, my tension changed. No, it's still the same, but it might have changed. So I'm going to look at that, and it stayed the same. My stitch length changed. It changed from a 2.5 to a 3. So in my head, I'm saying, okay, that means when I'm working with denim or I'm working with something heavier, I should be lengthening my stitch length. Now, when I go to sew something like this, and I'm working with this, and I'll set this up and start going, I used a zigzag stitch. When you're working with heavier fabric like this, what you have to think about is, look at how deep that is. So as we look at our buttons here, if I was to take my foot and go up into that highest level, I need to be able to fit it underneath the foot. And then when the foot comes down, it needs to be able to close the tension. So if you're asking yourself how thick fabric can go underneath there, that's one of the considerations. Because if you put something so thick underneath there, and let's use this as an example, right? So if I put this underneath like this, there's my 30 fabrics, and I put my foot down. If you don't hear that tension closed, then you're not going to get good tension. So you are aware that when that foot comes down, that you need to hear that tension closing. This would be too much fabric to go in there on this machine because the foot didn't come down far enough for the tension to close. And I could hear it trying to, but it just wasn't able to. So that's something I really keep in mind. Now here I've got plenty of room. My foot is in that extra lift, right? It's in the extra lift. I can put it in here like this, no problem. When the foot comes down, I can hear that tension closing. I know I'm going to be all right. Now, sometimes people think because we have the sewing advisor, it's going to do everything for us. But one thing we need to keep in mind, whether we're working with denim, whether we're working with leather and vinyl, is if you're working with a very thick fabric, when you start stitching, you should be looking at what the press-to-foot pressure is feeling like. So when I started working with this, I'm going to go over here. All right, I'm going to get it set up where I was and put the foot down. And I'm going to change to a zigzag. So when I go over to my machine and I change my stitch, I'm going to go to a zigzag. Now up on my screen over here, I can see that the regular zigzag is stitch number 5. And there's also a 3-part zigzag that may be a good option. That's stitch number 6. I like to use number 5, but I know many people like to use the 3-step zigzag. And all of our machines have that stitch on it. So I'm just going to choose 5. Wait a second here. And let me see. I've got stitch number 5 selected, and I'm going to touch OK. So when I start stitching, I will always do a little test to see what's happening. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. And when I start, I don't charge ahead at 100 miles an hour. I start off slowly, make sure everything sounds good, right? It's going to do the tie off. And I know that because the fix button was lit up. Now the width of this stitch is at a 4. And if I leave it at a 4, I'm going to have to work a little harder to tie both sides in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the width of that stitch to a 5. And now all I'm doing is holding this as it's going. Now my fabric is moving nice and easy. So now I know I can pick up speed and keep working. But if I felt like it was sluggish and it was slow going through, it might be that I need to lighten my press-to-foot pressure, because maybe the foot's coming down so hard on this heavy fabric, on the thick fabric, that I might need to lighten my press-to-foot pressure. And I know a lot of people don't think about doing that, but I think if I lighten my press-to-foot pressure every time I stop, and I'm going to set my machine so that the needle is in the down position, every time I stop, that foot lifts up to pivot. And as I go, let me do a little more. It gives me a little bit more freedom if I lighten my press-to-foot pressure. So if I lighten my press to foot pressure, as I start to sew around the corner and go from one place to another, then the foot is not going to drag on the material, and I will be able to rotate this circle much, much easier. So to get onto the press to foot pressure, and this is on all of our machines, we have the ability to lighten our press to foot pressure. I'm going to go to the tools. Let me see if you can see right here. On the opals, it's down here in the bottom right. And the first item you see there, it says P foot pressure. That sounds for pressure foot pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch it, and then it opens a window, and I'm going to say, I'm going to bring it down to a 3. Now, I have heard a lot of people say, well, I should never have to touch my machine. And it's true. In principle, you don't have to touch your machine. But the more that you know about your machine, the more you know about sewing and how you like to work, the more you're going to find using these features is going to give you better results. So I always recommend, if I'm doing an applique, if I'm doing something like this where I need to be turning in circles or I need to manipulate my fabric more, that I am going to lighten my press to foot pressure. So I'm just going to start sewing just to show you. All right. So now I'm going to sew without stopping. And now the foot is sitting on top and holding it, but it's not coming down so tight that it stops me from sewing around in a curve. And that does make it a lot easier when I do this. All right. Now, in this case, I wrapped the fabric and I used one of these little clips, and I'm going to basically wrap it as I go. I know some people that they will prepare this all ahead of time, but I prefer to wrap it as I go, because it might be by the time that I'm done that I decide I don't really like it. And I would much prefer to make a decision as I'm going. This way I could say, well, maybe I want to add another fabric. And so I might stop at a specific place and then add another fabric to it. And quite honestly, that is the way that I work when I do everything. Is I like to see where I'm going. I like to see what it's going to look like. And then I'll make a decision. So I personally don't wrap the fabric ahead of time, but I know a lot of people that do that. So that's good. Now, there was a question about using the non-stick foot. Now, when I am working with leather and vinyl, and I'm going to be sewing on the front of this, like on the belt, for example, right? If you use a metal foot, like the B foot or the A foot, the metal foot often will stick to the vinyl or to the leather. And you're going to think your machine's not working because the fabric is not feeding and you're kind of sewing in the same place. That's because the metal foot is sticking to your leather. And so in that case, and it's true when you're working with vinyl, even the clear vinyl, I would always use the non-stick foot. It's the white foot, and it comes with most of your machines. Aren't I good? I'm not making you buy anything extra today. You've got it. It comes with all of our machines that have the sewing advisor, have that H foot. The number of it is a H, and it is a foot that is just fabulous when you're sewing with leather, you're sewing with vinyl, or anything like that you're working with that's got, the other thing that's even good for, even the material that you got that has the sequins on it all over. If you start sewing that with your A foot, you'll go out of your mind because it won't feed. But you put on that non-slip foot and it'll do a fabulous job. So the other option you would have would be your interchangeable walking foot, right? So the bar, this bar right here, goes over your needle bar, and then every time you take a stitch, the foot lifts up the pressure as you go. And so in this case, you wouldn't have to lighten the press foot pressure because every stitch, the foot is coming up and going down, and that's doing the same thing as taking the pressure off of your fabric. Somebody asked a question. Don't you have to flip that rope piece? That's not a complete sentence, so I'm not sure what that means, but we'll come back with a complete sentence and then I'll figure out what it means. All right. So, and the H foot, let me show you the H foot. It looks like this. So anytime it's a white foot, anytime I'm working with anything that's sticky, whether it be sequins, leather, marine vinyl, or any of that kind of stuff, or sequins that is going to stick to your regular foot, then that's why the H foot is included there. And if you go to marine vinyl, on your machine, if you go to the setting that says leather or vinyl, it's going to tell you put on the H foot. Okay, here's the question. Sorry, don't you have to flip that over in order to tip it up? Well, I'm going to show you how, if you want to make a bowl, how you can tip it up and you can continue with that. And somebody asked about, wouldn't the edge joining foot work well to join the rope basket together? Or does the middle guide on it not allow you to turn circles well? That is a really great suggestion. And I tried it and I didn't like it because the edge joining foot has got the bar in the middle. And it does keep both pieces really nice and close together. But because the rope is so thick, it tends to kind of leave them a little bit farther apart. And I had to work harder to put them together. So I tried the A foot, which is flat on the bottom, and that did a really nice job of keeping the ropes together, and they didn't slide out, and I felt like I was able to control it more. I also tried the B foot. The B foot's got the groove underneath for bulkier fabrics, so it makes sense to use that, and that worked very well. And for those of you that have OmniMotion stitches, I tried it with the S foot because the S foot's a big wide foot. That is like a big A foot, but it's much, much wider, because I was curious whether that would control the rope from moving, and that did a really nice job too. So I think the best thing to do is everybody should be going home and trying these things, right? The reason I'm mentioning all the possibilities is because what's my favorite thing to do may not be your favorite thing to do, and I really want you to go through the process of testing something and seeing, does this work? Or maybe I like this better. And so, you know, when I'm telling you things, it's not meant to be something written in gold. I want you to go through the ideas, test out the different feet, see what you like best, because I think that's going to make you the happiest. All I'm telling you is our machines can do a fabulous job doing this. Now, the person who asked about flipping it over so that I can go around the sides, that is absolutely correct. But I'm going to go back over there and I'm going to show you that. All right. But I was going to get to that in a moment. And well, my favorite foot, honestly, is my favorite foot to use is the one that I can find when I need it. So I've come to like using the A foot. It's flat on the bottom. I think it holds the rope really nice. And but I don't, at this point, don't have a preference. I would use the A foot, the B foot, or the S foot, and either one I'd be happy with. So you give them a try. And if there was a favorite foot, I would tell you for sure. You could also use the walking foot, right? And I find that this being bulkier, I didn't have as good a vision because of having the interchangeable walking foot. The foot is wider, and I wanted to have a little bit more control when I was doing this. But I would use this for sure when I was working with denim or bulkier fabrics where I really wanted to have that pressure off so that it didn't stretch out the fabric as I'm working on it. Okay, I'm going to go back and show you the rope bowl one more time. And then after that, we're going to switch and we're going to look at some stitches that really work well with sewing with denim. And I'm going to show you some special stitches that we have on our machine that maybe you've forgotten are there. So we've got another 20 minutes. Let's see how much I can fit in with that. All right. So let me change over here. All right. Now, you see the way that I'm going here, that I'm going to just back out a little bit so you can see. All right. Now, when you're building, if you're left-handed or right-handed, you may go and approach this in a different way. So as you see, all the bulk is in here, right? Now, the way that you start to be able to get a bowl to come up the sides like this is you've got to tip it up. And the way that I have it right now, I can't do that. So it's very easy. All I'm going to do is cut the thread. And that's the question that somebody was asking. I bet that was Jamie. So I'm going to turn it over. So now the purple's on this side. And I want to show you, if you wanted to make a rope bowl and you wanted to be able to have the sides, what you're going to do is you tip this up like this, right to the side, left side of your machine. And then as you start stitching, I got a thread there. As you start stitching, you're just letting that stay up there. It's almost like your hand is just resting up here like this as you're going. Very, very easy to do. And after the first row, you'll notice that it's starting to curve. On this one, I did the first row and I right away started to see that the whole thing was curving. So sometimes it's more or less, but if you wanted to see it curve more, then what you do is when the cord is going through, you can give a little bit of a firm pressure on it, and then it will go up more straight and more faster than if you just let the rope sit there and start sewing, okay? And there we go. And now you can start to see this is starting to curve up. Let me cut it and I'll see if I can bring it closer to you. Now it's very slight, but you can see that this area here is starting to come up, and it'll just keep coming up and more as you go. And you can, maybe you go up for a while and then you decide it's coming up straight and then you want it to go out the other way. Well, you can play around with that. You can turn the bowl upside down and go from the other side, and this time you would let it slant down, and you could take the free arm off. That would make that easier. Okay, let's see, there's a question. When using the walking foot, do you decrease or increase the press-foot pressure? When I'm using the walking foot, I probably would not decrease or increase. I would leave it the way it is, because the press-foot pressure is already being taken off every time you make a stitch. So that is less of an issue when you're doing that. Okay. Now I'm going to come back and we're going to get into more of a sewing type of thing. I'm going to go and look at my stitches, and I'm going to come back to my sewing stitches. Now we have, let me get out of my set menu here. There we go. We have some really great stitches for working with our denims and our different products that we have here. This is a great stitch for darning denim. And I just wanted to show you that because I think a lot of people don't realize how fabulous this is. So right now, this is stitch number 22, and it looks like 4 or 5 lines. And so I'm going to go and touch stitch number 22, and I'm just going to do a little demo, and I hope we can get everything done. So it doesn't look like much right now, but what is important is you see this reverse button. So this works on all of our machines that are out there, from the 690, the 650, they all have this darning stitch. So if you have a piece of denim, all right, maybe I'm going to go to a heavier denim here. If you had a piece of denim and you had a hole in it, what you're going to do is if the hole goes this way, you're going to do the stitch the opposite way. If I could find my scissors, let me see if I can find my scissors. I'm going to make a hole. All right, so let's put a hole right here. All right, I have a hole in my denim jeans right there. So what I would do is I would put a fabric on the back. Usually I would put a stabilizer like the Lycra one that'll iron on to give it a little bit of support, or I could just use a cotton fabric. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going over to my machine, and this is really cool the way this works. All right, so it says to put the B-foot on. That's the B-foot. There's the cut that I have. You can see the cut. So that means I'm going to do the stitch this way. And it is responding to the 29 needle positions we have. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down. We're starting behind the cut. We're going to come forward. And once I get past the cut, now I touch the reverse button. And now the next thing I'm going to do is put my foot on the pedal, and that needle is going to go back and forth in the left needle position, and very slowly it's going to move closer to the right. I'm going to do it so you can see what happens, because this is a really good reminder. And all you can see is it's going to do a perfect darning job, and you won't even be able to see the holes there if you are matching the thread color. Now, it went in all of those 29 needle positions from the left to the right. If you wanted to keep going, that's when you're going to touch the stop button on your machine, and it would remember that shape. And when I touch my needle, the foot lifts up, and then I can just go over to the last place it stopped and keep going. So I'm not going to do that, but this is a really cool thing. So if you have a line that's a cut that's much wider, you can cover that whole area. But what I love about that stitch is it is very, very smooth. And if I used a navy thread in there, you would never see that that was done. Look at on the back, on the part that was all stitched. You can't even see that that was that they're stitching on there. It just kind of blends in because I have the gray on the bottom, and it just disappears in there. So that's really handy. We have a lot of special stitches that are meant for working with denim. We actually have a bar tack that's there. We have the reinforced stitch, and that's the stitch number 3 that you could use instead of having to use the jeans thread, and it'll go back and forth to give you that much heavier look. Now I'm going to switch over. Let me check my questions here. No. All right. I'm going to switch over to the Epic 2. And let's talk about some things that we're going to do over here. Now, on my screen, this is, I think you guys are going to love this. And some of you know, and I'm sure because you might have learned it, but if you haven't, I'm going to do, I just have a regular stitch that's there, right? And if I was sewing a seam, what I would do is just sew my seam like a regular seam like this. And then when I'm ready to hem my denim jeans, I'm going to double it over like this. Now, if you want to make your life easier on yourself, you can go in here and trim back that corner. I'm not going to do that because I want to show you what it looks like without doing it. So I'm just going to fold it back like this and show the seam. And I'm going to come over here. I think that'll give us a good view. Let's see. I'll go a little bit closer. All right, so I'm going to stitch it from this side. Now, if I was a really finicky person and I was doing that reinforced stitch, I would be stitching it from the right side. But I'm going to do it from this side because I want to show you how this works. All right, so all I'm going to do is I've got my straight stitch. What fabric do I have selected? I have woven medium selected. Or no, sorry, woven heavy selected. So I already did that ahead of time. My stitch length is at 3. My tension's at 4.6. And if I wanted to see my, whoops, let me get back out here for a little bit. If I wanted to see my press-a-foot pressure, then I would find that where the tension is. If I touch that button, there's my press-a-foot pressure. And I could lighten that like that. So that's how it works on the Epic. And most of our other embroidery machines have the same thing. All right, so we're going to go back. Now, this is called, many of us call it a hump jumper, but it's called a button reed. And you can use it to put buttons on when you need a shank, when you're doing it for like a heavy coat or something like that. But it actually has a secondary use for it that's much more valuable. And if you like, now I have a denim needle in here. When I start sewing, I'm just going to start sewing and show you what I'm going to do. All right. Now I can charge right over this because I know the piercing power on the Epic 2 is phenomenal. But I don't want to do that because for many of you, you don't have this kind of piercing power. So if you don't have a machine that has the piercing power of the Epic 2, then this hump jumper is a fabulous, fabulous tool. You'll notice that one side is thinner and one side is thicker. So if you've got a big jump, a wad of fabric to get over, the reason people break their needle, let me go up here just a little farther, okay? The reason people break their needle is that when they get to that big seam, the foot starts to stick up in the air. And when that foot sticks up in the air, what happens is the needle comes down, and it's not so much that it's not going through the fabric, but because of the angle, it hits the foot. And what happens with this hump jumper is all you do is you put it behind to flatten the fabric out. And then as you start sewing, you're going to see, look at how nice a job it's doing, right? And then if you had a really big lump, you could come back in the front and do the same thing until the foot levels out. All right. And then pull it away like that. So this will work on any of our machines. And if you don't know where your button reed is, you should go and look at it. There's a little hole in mine because you could put the needle in to help put the needle in place. But this is much more valuable for working with really, really thick, heavier fabrics, whether they be leathers or vinyls or heavy denim. This will save you all kinds of trouble because you know you're going to get that really nice stitch when you're done. So let us just check to see if anybody has any questions here. All right, I'll come back over here. All righty, here, no questions so far. We're almost out of time though. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed seeing some more project ideas. I'd love to see if you make any bowls or coasters or anything you're making. I'd love to see some pictures of them. And I've got one more thing that I have to show you, so don't go anywhere. All right, I told you I was going to show you the secret to working with these really, really bulky corners. And it's so simple. It's only going to take me a minute to show you. So here is the corner where I haven't sewn the pockets into that piece, right? So I'm going to go over to my machine. I'm going to show you this one more thing, and then we'll call it a day. There it is here. Okay. Now, most of the time, I should get a pin. Let me get a pin. Maybe not. Most of the time, when you are working on something very, very bulky and thick like this, what people do is they start at the very edge of the fabric. And just like, you know how we were talking about how that bulky area, how the foot's up in the air like this is actually the hardest way to do this. And if you do it the way that I'm showing you, you will find it's much, much easier. So whenever I have a really big, heavy lump or bump of fabric that I need to sew, what I do is I start my fabric all the way on underneath my foot, lift it up nice and high. Now on the Epic and some of our newer machines, when you put your foot into that extra lift position, the feed teeth drop down. So now I have lots more space to put this in. When I'm going here, instead of starting at the very edge of the fabric, I'm going to start backwards. Down farther. And I won't have sewn like maybe the first 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to take a couple of stitches, get that locked in. All right. Now I'm going to go in reverse. And when I go in reverse, what happens is it flattens out all of that fabric. So as I start stitching, it just flattens it out. And I can get to the very end. All right. Keep going. And now when I come back, because I've already sewn on that, it flattened the whole thing out, and it makes it much, much easier to be able to keep going. Look at how beautiful that is. So I didn't have to fight with that bump at the beginning by starting somewhere in the, down about a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch and going backwards. It totally took care of all of the bulk that I had, and it made it really, really easy to sew that. So I think our time is just about up. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I give it a try. The first thing you need, I'm going to give you something you need to do. If you do not have a denim needle and you don't have a variety of needles, sizes, you should go out and just pick up a package of needles, because now what you're finding in the stores, a lot of the denims have stretch in them. And so sometimes we think a denim needle might be the right needle for denim, but if your denim has got lycra in it and a lot of different fibers in there, you might find that a stretch needle is going to be much better for you. And if you don't have a stretch needle, there's not much you can do, right? You're going to use what you've got. So having the needles available when you're ready to sew is well worth it. I know myself, I put all my needles in a nice little package and put them away so that I would have them all. And I lost the package. I have no idea where it is. It'll turn up sometime soon, but I'm going to have to go and buy some more needles. So make sure that you've got a good collection of needles when you're at home sewing, so that if you get a skip stitch, you know the first thing you're going to do is change the needle out. I hope you've enjoyed this today. Thank you. And look for some of the projects. I'm hoping that we're going to post a project or two. And if you've made these, post some pictures, because I know everybody would love to see them. And I hope that you get excited to try something new tomorrow. So goodbye, everybody. It was so wonderful for you to join me. It was nice to see you. Bye-bye.